Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of what we think we're calling the Blood Feud podcast. I'm Neil.
I am Sam.
Just, I guess, a little background about the podcast. Me and Sam, we always watch horror movies. We'll send each other just weird recommendations, and then we just kind of talk about them. And so one day Sam was like, why don't we just record it while we're talking about it and put it up online? So that's what we're doing.
That's what we're going to do.
We're going to try to look at modern stuff. You know, we don't think that you guys want to hear a podcast about the Nightmare Before...
Or like the Nightmare Before Elm Street.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Nightmare on Elm Street. Or like Friday the 13th. That's already been talked about.
Hitchcock or something.
Right. So we're going to try to find weird stuff. We're going to try to find indie stuff.
Maybe cult stuff. All that kind of stuff.
And we're going to different stuff. And we want it to be, modern within the last 10, 15 years. Yeah. So, first movie we got up, we're going to do is, it's a Japanese movie from 2005, and it's called, probably not going to say it right, but it's called Noroi, or The Curse. So we're just going to refer to it as The Curse. Directed by a guy named Koji Shirahishi. He hasn't really had any other big, well-known movies. Same with the cast. There's not really any international stars in there.
Yeah, I thought this was the guy that had done, like The Ring and The Grudge, but that was proven to be false. That's not a real thing. But yeah, what this is, it's a 2005 film. It's a found footage film, and what's interesting about that is, I don't think we're used to seeing found footage in the J-horror genre.
Yeah.
And the way it's done is definitely different, wouldn't you say?
As far as found footage goes, yeah, it's most of the time when you watch a found footage movie, it centers around 2, 3 maybe characters, and you just follow them for an hour a day, a week maybe. There's like 20 something characters in
there
it.
might even be 25 or something. Something crazy like that.
It goes for months, several months, like over a couple months
period of time. Yeah. It's irregularly complex for a what would you call it, the found footage genre.
Footage, yeah.
And on top of that, another challenge as an American viewer is that there's a definite Japanese storytelling style to it that might throw people off. I don't think Neil or myself are super qualified to talk about that, as far as the difference between American and Japanese storytelling. But you'll definitely notice that on top of there being a lot of characters, the storytelling jumps around a lot more than an American movie might.
You'll get 10 minutes with this character, and then you'll go and you'll spend 5-10 minutes with this character.
Right.
And it all is kind of centered around
Masafuma Kobayashi.
Yeah, I was going to say let's get into the plot a little bit, just the basic.
Right, and to give you guys an idea of how this is going to go, we'll do our very basic thoughts, spoiler free for you, kind of a summation of the movie's ideas and what we think about it. And then if you haven't seen the movie but you'd like to, we'll let you guys know when we're going to start talking about spoilers,
right,
and get more in depth with it. And that would be the point where you can shut it off and maybe come back to it once you've seen the movie,
right,
if you would like to.
We'd appreciate it.
We'd be pumped about that. Right, so Masafumi Kobayashi is the main character. I interrupted you, Neil.
Oh, you're good. It's basically he's a paranormal researcher in the world of this film, and he's created several films on the paranormal. And it follows him as he's making a new film called The Curse. And he goes around and he starts off talking to several different people, and it seems kind of not connected, I guess. Like, it's just he's talking to random people, all following kind of the same... It's like part of the same investigation.
Yeah, there's a series of disappearances, and I think potentially deaths that are connected in some way. And at first, it seems like there is a woman and this boy that keep moving around that seem to be affiliated with these disappearances and deaths. And the first scene of this movie actually it's kind of a typical found footage. Well, not even found footage. It's kind of that trope where it's like this guy was filming a documentary. Right. He was found, and his house burned down. Yeah, and his wife was found dead. He is now missing. So I think it begins in kind of like a what would you call that? Like a familiar way,
right? Like normally, like something like Paranormal Activity, it'll be like these people were found dead last week. Right. Here's the tape found in their bedroom. It's something like that, kind of where it's know, it tells you in advance how it's going to end a little bit. Right. But it doesn't, that's not really the important part. The important part is how it gets to that. And I mean, we'll talk about it later, but it's not, it does end a little bit differently than what the world believes. Yeah, or what the movie at first wants you to believe. Right.
So we've talked about the fact that there's a lot of characters. The plot I do want to mention is I think I already said a little bit of this. The plot is pretty complex for a found footage film. The runtime is also extremely long for a found footage film, just under 2 hours.
Yeah, most found footage, you're lucky if you get an hour and a half.
Yeah, I want to know what your thoughts on the runtime.
I definitely thought there were parts that could have been cut out, but my thing with runtime is usually, especially in horror movies, is when people complain about downtime. Right. The downtime kind of adds into the scares, because it draws you into the world, it draws you into the characters, and you start to feel more at ease in the world, I guess. And then when the strange stuff, the paranormal stuff starts to occur, it's even more shocking and scary. And
I can't say that I did feel a little encumbered by the end. I felt a little tired, but I felt like the film did a good job of maintaining suspense pretty constantly.
Yeah. Well, there's always something going on, even if it's just dialogue between the characters. It's always for a reason, it seems like. It's never just downtime. Like, it might be slow, but it's always going somewhere.
Right. And I think, if you haven't seen the movie, that's going to help you, especially in the scenes that, when the film takes an especially Japanese turn, which, the game show scenes. There's a couple weird game show scenes where it seems like game show footage is just being kind of sliced into the film. Right. At a weird time, and you kind of have to roll with that because it is connected, but it just comes out of a bizarre place.
It starts off, you're watching the tapes of this film, and in the middle of that, it's a TV broadcast.
Right. So there's a couple different stories within the story, right? Because you're already watching a tape, and there's tapes within that tape that Kobayashi has kind of peppered in, right? And then at the end, there's another tape, but we can't talk about that yet.
And what's cool about, even though it might at first seem like it's not connected, everything kind of starts to come together towards the end, and all those little side things do become relevant for the most part.
I think to an extent, and I don't want to talk about it yet because it's going to involve spoilers, but I do have stuff to say about that. What else was I going to say here? Another thing I noticed about the film that kind of relates to maybe not the J-horror altogether, but is that it's much more dramatic than a normal found footage film. It has a soundtrack, and it has... Did you notice how there's some scenes where the camera will repeat? And this is supposed to be Kobayashi's spin on the genre, but it'll zoom in on something, and you'll see something, and then it'll slow-mo zoom on. Yeah, it'll replay.
It's almost like those, the Alien movies, PBS documentaries that are or the Bigfoot tape where he walks by in the background, and then in slow motion, it's grainy, zoomed in, but it just shows in a little bit more detail something that you might have missed.
Yeah, this was a convention that I don't know if I was totally on board with, and I want to know what you thought about that.
I think it kind of plays into the idea that, because he's a professional filmmaker, and other found footage movies, it's college kids going out in the woods, Blair Witch. It's just people filming. They're just grabbing the camera because something weird's happened, and he does this for a living. He is, he makes these alien conspiracy type theory films just for paranormal stuff. So it makes sense, I think, in the context there, and it works, I think, to generate scares. For the most part.
Yeah, we can in a few minutes we'll move on to the non-spoiler section, but I can talk about at least a few instances where that I think is effective. I also think it kind of works against the film because it destroys any kind of subtlety that
That's
maybe
true.
the documentary style horror, or found footage style horror film kind of has reign over.
Because you're saying because it's so blatantly being pointed out to you?
It's like very melodramatic
Right.
and calling attention, and then the soundtrack comes in and it's like, whoa.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about that because I know I feel you on that.
What I want to ask you, what are your spoiler-free thoughts other than these things on the movie?
Spoiler free. I think this was probably one of the better found footage movies I've ever seen.
Okay.
Especially considering it came out, or maybe because it came out in 2005. So really the only big, I say there's tons of found footage movies, but the only big one was Blair Witch.
Yeah, and then, what year was that? That was 1999.
You're right.
Yeah.
And then, stuff like Paranormal Activity didn't come until 2007.
Yeah.
And you get Wreck, the Spanish movie that Quarantine was based on. That was 2007.
And then there's Cloverfield
in 2008.
Interesting. So this movie was really standing in isolation as a found footage film at
especially
the time.
as a Japanese found footage film.
Right. Yeah.
So I would recommend it if you're a fan of horror, if you're a fan of, which I'm assuming if you're listening to this you probably are, if you're a fan of found footage horror especially, I would recommend it for sure.
And my thoughts are, I definitely agree. I would recommend it. I think really, if you're a fan of suspense, I would say even mystery and horror in general, because I don't think this movie is overly intense with scares, but it does maintain that very constant air of suspense. The only thing I want to say about it, spoiler free, is that I think the complex plot layers and the character development and all of the events that happen that seem to be very dense throughout the movie, and it does keep you wondering, but I don't know, in contrast to what you said earlier, I don't know if everything comes together at the end.
There might be some stuff that...
and we'll get into that in a minute, and I think that was my biggest letdown with the movie, is that it doesn't quite give me enough, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think I might agree with you. It depends on what you're thinking about, but we'll see.
We'll see. So we're gonna call an end to the spoiler-free segment. If you haven't seen the movie but want to watch it, you might want to turn it off. If you don't care,
the whole movie's on YouTube, which is actually how I found it, which is kind of weird because it's this random Japanese movie. It's on YouTube, and it's kind of difficult to find a whole lot of information about it. So we'll throw up the YouTube link wherever we end up posting this, Facebook, Twitter. And you can check it out for yourself. But sorry,
it's cool. There's a couple different. There's one of them has better quality than the other one. We'll find it. We'll post it for you guys. So without further ado, we're gonna move on now. If you're gonna cut out now, we hope you'll come back to listen to the rest. If you're gonna stay with us, that's awesome. So what would you like to talk about first?
So they all die. I'm just kidding. So I think one thing, it all starts, like you said, he goes to a neighbor's house that's been having paranormal things going on in her house. She said like banging noises.
I think there's some baby crying.
But it's like distorted baby crying. And she said it happened once her neighbor moved in, and it was a neighbor. And is it one kid or two kids? It was two.
There's a neighbor whose name, I'm gonna pull the name up. It's a woman and a boy.
It's Junko Ishii.
Yeah, Junko Ishii and a boy, a mysterious boy with her. And then what would happen is these families living near Junko Ishii and this boy will experience these things, and then Junko Ishii will peace out, and this family will die like a week later. And this is a trend that happens throughout the movie. And that's what kind of leads Kobayashi to investigate all these things.
Right. So the first people he goes and sees, nothing scary really happens. He
Yeah.
goes and he tries to get into the neighbor's house and he can't find a way in, but he does find a bunch of dead pigeons.
Yeah, the dead pigeon motif is constant throughout the movie. What did you think of the dead pigeon motif?
I almost wonder if the dead pigeons was something that we were missing because we're not familiar with Japanese culture.
It could be.
If pigeons
Yeah.
are of cultural significance in Japanese, or maybe it was just,
Right.
just a random, we'll make dead pigeons, which, either way.
It's definitely, it reminded me of other movies I've seen, not necessarily in the genre, but that's like, the dead, what movie? There's a movie called Dark Skies that was filmed partially at OU,
yeah.
where we're recording this podcast, and there's, that's all about aliens, and these birds are like attracted to. Anyway, it reminded me of that.
Well, a lot of people think, that's a thing, right? Where like owls are
Because
connected to
that like magnetic,
right?
The way they navigate magnetically.
Which we're kind of getting off topic now,
Yeah,
but birds
it was interesting.
are like a common thing in horror. Something like Hitchcock's The Birds, and I don't know. It seems like in a lot of paranormal movies, there's birds dying or some type of animal that dies because of the haunting or the spirit or
so kind of playing off I don't know if it plays off of that directly, but one of the main characters is Kana, who is the girl that disappeared.
Right. It's the reason that he's going to that he's making this film. He's contacted by her parents.
Right. And we can assume you guys have seen the movie and know most of this, although I should say, as soon as I finished this movie, I went to try to find forums and plot summaries, and just because of the complex plot, the characters, it's hard to follow.
Right.
So, but what I wanted to ask you is the scene in the game show where Kana is one of the psychics. I'm wondering, I couldn't find an answer anywhere. Was she supposed to be a psychic before her interaction with this demonic entity, or is it possible that this demonic entity being around Junko Ishii has made her psychic? Because I don't know if that's clear either.
Right. I guess I didn't really think about it too much when I watched it.
Right.
But basically what happens in the scene is it's a guy and he crumples up a piece of paper and it's a room full of school children and he says, draw what you see on the paper. And it goes through several rounds of this, and she's the only one that gets it right. And it's a very complex one, and she draws a face. Yeah,
she gets the shape wrong. To be clear, there's like paper inside a bottle with something drawn on it. These kids can't look at it, but if they're psychic, they'll see what's on it, right?
Essentially.
And she draws the face, who we later find out is this entity called Kagutaba, a demonic entity.
Right.
And that just makes me wonder, did she acquire these psychic abilities because she had already been entered?
I think it has something to do with her being around the demon itself.
I think so too, because that shortly after she goes missing.
Right.
And maybe I think Junko Ishii was supposed to be living near her at that time. It's tough to say, and that's what I'm saying. There's these subtleties and these things that aren't really cleared up in the movie. That's not really about the end, but
right. There is something about the end though that I feel like might tie into that.
Okay.
Which we should probably just talk about it when we get there. But it almost seems like she's trying to summon this entity and to bring it give it an earthly form. At least we'll talk about it later.
By drawing.
No, Junko Ishii. It seems that's the whole reason that these occurrences are happening around her.
Right. And okay, now I know what you're saying.
We'll talk about that later, but maybe because she's taking these people. Well, she takes Kana.
Yeah.
And it's almost like she's making a sacrifice.
Yeah.
So
I think so.
It seems like she would have to come into some kind of contact with the demon, but we'll talk about that later.
On that same note, on the note of that mask, it kind of keeps making appearances subtly. That is one of the cooler things about this movie. The film will cut out, especially in that scene with Hori, the tinfoil man. Who
should we talk about him for a second?
Let's talk about the tinfoil man briefly. I think he's the best character in the movie.
I would agree.
Even though he's obnoxious as can be. Hori is a psychic who claims that there are countless number of ectoplasmic worms, which
Yes.
I also want to talk about. That is my biggest question, is the ectoplasmic worms. But he claims that there's ectoplasmic worms everywhere in space-time, and they're trying to eat people. And he has to wear this tinfoil and live in a tinfoil warehouse.
It's not even a warehouse. It's a little hut
It's some
that
kind
he's
of
repurposed to be all tinfoil, and he lives in a box inside the house.
It's utterly ridiculous, and that's another part where you can, and I like that you can see the Japanese art culture coming through,
Right.
just that idea, because I don't think you'd see that in an American movie. We would think it's outrageous, but it's not outrageous. It's just a different.
Right. It's a different environment.
Yeah.
And it seems strange, and it is strange, but I would think that in the context of Japanese culture, it's maybe a little less strange. Not the fact that he lives in tinfoil, but just the fact that he lives in one of these little houses.
Yeah.
Because he does have a lot of neighbors that are totally normal people.
Yeah. Yeah. But the Hori, the tinfoil man, serves as Kobayashi's kind of guide through this. And I like the interplay between them, because Hori comes off as this, he'd be like the equivalent of like a crazy homeless
medium,
person.
but he's
in
like
America.
a medium.
But yes, but he's psychic. And
Kobayashi's very grounded.
Right.
I mean, not in science, but in this is paranormal, and I'm okay with that, and we're gonna figure it out.
Right.
And Hori's kind of, this is paranormal, and everybody needs to be worried, and I'm worried, and
Yep. So, I don't know if I'd call that a foil. Also, that would be extremely ironic.
a tinfoil.
A tinfoil, but the interplay between them is very interesting, albeit a little bit heavy-handed. But that's also just some of the culture coming off.
So I guess to continue the plot, the reason he meets up with Hori is Hori thinks he knows where Kana might be.
Right. So Kobayashi is looking for Kana. Now, at the same time, let's leave that situation for a second. There is another character who we need to look up her name.
The actress?
Is it Marika? No, the actress.
Marika.
The actress Marika. And she comes into the story and eventually intersects with Kobayashi, but she is experiencing paranormal things. And we're introduced to her through the found footage.
It's a different program.
Right, so describe this.
I think this was one of the more scary, frightening parts of the film.
I agree. Let's sum it up quickly.
So it's her and the two hosts of the show. They're out in the forest.
It's like a ghost hunting show. A Japanese ghost hunting show.
They're by like a temple, like an old temple, right?
Like a shrine.
And she says that she starts to feel a presence, or she's hearing voices, right?
Yeah, she is psychic as well, yes.
It's a voice saying, doesn't it saying...
we later find out that it's a low voice saying Kagutaba, which is the name of this demon.
Right.
Now, during this scene, and this is one of those scenes that is weird because it's got that style where it keeps jumping around. But basically, there's nothing in that scene, and then we cut to a movie studio where Kobayashi is with Marika, the actress. They're looking at these tapes, and the person that edited this tape of this paranormal show that Marika was on says, "Hey, I cut something out of that shot. I didn't want to frighten her,
Right.
So then, in a weird series of twists and turns over the next 5 minutes, you finally get to see what is in the tape. And this was one of the cooler moments in the movie, which is basically, I'm assuming it's got to be the demon Kagutaba or something else.
Yeah, or someone
a ghost
connected.
And that's not clear either.
Right, but it's scary.
We see a camera pan that there's something that's behind her, and you can watch it yourself because I don't want to spoil that, even though this is, if you've seen the scene, I think it stands for itself.
One thing, going back to how you were saying you maybe wanted more out of it.
Right.
I went back, me and you both went back, and we watched the initial, run through, and even though the guy says that he edits stuff out, it still would have been cool to give little hints, maybe like a fuzzy part, or like some type of hint that something's going on.
That is interesting. I couldn't help but feel, really now, I can't help but feel like my time was a little bit wasted, and it could have, you know what I mean? It could have been, that could have been done a little bit more artfully than, and then you even get that repeat slow motion zoom that I was talking about on that ghostly figure, which, it's dramatic, but I almost think it's too much, and that's just my opinion.
See, it's true. It is too much, and I almost wonder if that was a director choice to try and make it seem more like, a PBS type of film.
You get the really low, like I said, that
right,
like the dramatic, One on this note, on the note of subtleties and the lack thereof, I want to show you a picture I took while I was watching the movie of something that may or may not exist. So you know how we keep seeing the Kagutaba mask in weird places. Do you know when Kobayashi goes to visit the literature guy, the guy with the books, and he they read the scrolls, and they're like, "There's this town that was summoning,"
and the demon dates back centuries. Like there's writings about it that date back centuries.
It turns out that this demon Kagutaba is from a town where a bunch of sorcerers would summon this thing to cause destruction. In short, this town was eventually submerged in the water, but these sorcerers lost the ability to control Kagutaba, so they ended up having to perform rituals to appease
every year, once
a
year.
Right, but once the town was submerged, you can't do that anymore. So, of course, the demon is now loose, or so they say. But anyway, to get back on task, here is a picture of a pot in the room. Where in the room where Kobayashi was talking to this, I don't know what you call him, just the scholar. And there's a point where the camera pans very quickly. You see this pot. Doesn't it look like there's a face on that?
It does, yeah. I wonder if it's just because of the panning and the lighting.
I wonder too.
It's the thing with film to me is nothing's ever on accident.
Right, mise en scène,
Right.
But I have a little bit lack of confidence in this idea because I like it, but the film really didn't do much of that.
And when it did do that, it kind of pointed it out, or maybe there was just some of that we missed. Because there is the scene when he's with Hori where something causes it, but the tape burns out.
Right, and we start seeing a ton of Kagutaba masks replacing the film, like cutting into the actual film.
Right, and it's like a blue, it wipes kind of.
They look like, it's blue like patches on the tape, and they look like, if you've seen pictures of the Undercity beneath Paris with all the dead skulls, it looks like that. So I really liked that stuff. But yeah, I just had a hard time trusting that scene.
I think
I wanted to believe
something for people to look out for, I guess. I kind of want to watch it again and see if there's any other...
It's interesting.
Hidden masks.
Yeah.
So, after... What was the last thing? So, he goes and... Oh, here's one thing. So, we talked about how he goes and meets up with Hori because Hori knows where Kana was taken.
Right.
And he goes to this house where it's presumed that Kana was, and there's a young man there.
Yeah, lots of pigeons. And that he actually takes one, and we assume that he eats it,
or
although
kills
I don't
it,
really
or
know.
Sacrifices it.
Yeah, Hori is able to draw Kobayashi a map to where he thinks Kana is. The thing, I'm going to come back to that scene, but yeah. So Kobayashi continues to hunt down, goes to this house. Kind of doesn't really find out anything other than that there's a weird man living there.
Right, and nothing ever really comes of that.
Although Junko Ishii had also just been there.
Right, that is true.
With the boy. And again, Junko Ishii is the woman that keeps traveling around and causing all this destruction, all these weird deaths. And, there's a point in there where Kobayashi goes to visit the scholar to learn about this demon. Meanwhile, him and Marika, the actor, are trying to investigate her house because Marika keeps waking up, sleepwalking, so not waking up, and she keeps hearing, they take these like EVPs, very ghost hunter status, of babies crying and stuff like that.
And she hears the demon's name. It's
Kagutaba.
Babies crying, and
yeah. But so they go upstairs and there's banging, and there's no baby in the building. They specifically ask. Her roommate is her suite mate. I don't know what you call it. Somebody that her neighbor. Yeah. Her neighbor lives upstairs, and she doesn't know anything. She doesn't know a thing. Of course, she later turns up dead.
Along with the man that was living in the blue apartment.
Yeah, the blue apartment is, again, where Hori sent Kobayashi to try to find Kana. And eventually, the man that Kobayashi saw there, who was eating or killing the pigeons, turns up dead hung himself with this neighbor who lives above Marika, the
and a
actor,
couple other people,
and like 6 other people. Yeah, and the other interesting thing that I really liked is that Marika starts to knit these nooses, these very intricate nooses, and hang them around.
Oh, that's
and that
what that
comes
was?
back. Yes, they're nooses.
I thought it was just like a weird kind of chain link.
And well, there's some discussion forums that claim that they're nooses. It's tough
I
to
could
say.
See it. I could see
because
it,
they
for
hang
sure.
themselves. So
Right.
they do these weird things and they kidnap people and they hang themselves. But Marika has not done this yet. Eventually, when Kobayashi goes to visit, we talked about the village where these sorcerers were summoning Kagutaba before the village was submerged. Now all these sorcerers, their modern day descendants, have moved
Right.
to a village
Nearby.
yeah, where everybody has a dog because dogs were a very distinct part of this ritual.
They would kill it, or wouldn't they would kill the dog, or Kagutaba would.
See, that's unclear. That's another
Right.
thing that's unclear. Yeah, the village is called Shimakaj, where Kagutaba was imprisoned. Now they live in, I don't know where it is.
It does. I mean, it's not.
I think it
important.
says, but
it's
it
a
isn't
village.
important. And that's where Junko Ishii eventually moves, and Kobayashi tries to meet up with her again, and she keeps acting like a raving lunatic because she is.
Right, and it's after that he discovers that the origin, basically, of Junko Ishii.
Right, which is, let's talk about that
Yeah.
scene.
So going back, he goes and meets up with this expert, the scholar,
Yep.
on demonology, or I guess, old school rituals and sorcery.
Yep.
And he finds out that in this village, it wasn't like, it was in 1978 that this happened.
Okay.
It's Junko Ishii's father is basically the leader of the ritual.
Right, so in this video, we see one of these, you already say that, one of these rituals being conducted, which was to appease Kagutaba.
Right.
And we won't have to describe this in too much detail, but
I don't think we need to describe. It's a ritual.
Right,
There's different things that they go through, and one person that you later find out it's Junko Ishii.
Yes, there's a priest and then somebody playing the role of Kagutaba, and they're wearing this Kagutaba mask, which you see on the cover of the movie. Very, it's a very distinct mask.
It's pretty
I
freaky.
like the mask.
Yeah.
And there's also the scene, well, no, this is that scene. So anyway, you find out that the woman portraying Kagutaba is Junko Ishii,
Right.
who is the priest's daughter.
And it's not. Did something go wrong?
Something goes wrong
with
because
the ritual.
The ritual, and they're talking about the distinct bowing style that you do to
Right.
perform. It does none of that.
There's a number of claps
Yeah.
and bows.
Yeah, and they do it right, and it still goes wrong. Of course, why wouldn't it? And this scene was really good too because she starts freaking out and going all, I don't know, I'd call it like crab, but she's not like crab walking. She's just like kind of, and then
convulsing
she's just,
almost.
yeah, and it just zooms in on her face,
And
the
she has the
mask,
mask.
and she's screaming, and and then it cuts out, and it's really great. And of course, this ritual comes back with the climactic end, which we can probably start to talk about that sequence. Basically, having no luck with Junko Ishii, and with all these people dying, Marika, the actress, tells Kobayashi she wants to go to the lake, to the dam. There's a dam that has replaced Shumakaj, the old sorcerer village, and she says, I want to go there to perform the ritual to free myself, because she's getting, she's obviously possessed.
She's done with it. She's tired of having to deal with it.
Yeah. So they go, and this is where really the final sequence of the scene starts. Hori goes with them, the psychic.
And the cameraman. So there's four of them.
Yep. So they end up out on this lake. It's Hori on the shoreline, and then...
it's Hori and the cameraman.
Yeah,
and Kobayashi
and Marika are in the boat. Let's talk about this scene. I thought it did a pretty good job of generating suspense. I was disappointed with it, but it's really not about that scene.
Okay, I'm interested to hear what you were disappointed with.
I don't know if I was disappointed with it. It just, I expected something really bad to happen there, and it doesn't happen yet. But I do like the scene. You hear they're over a lake that you don't know how deep it is. There's an ancient demonic village beneath them, and they're just trying to do this ritual, and Kobayashi is like freaked out. He does not want to be there.
Right, they perform the ritual, like a little mini ritual.
She performed, the actress Marika performs it herself, yes.
And then she kind of shuts herself down for a second.
Yeah, it's unclear, but...
And then she wakes up,
yeah.
and she's very happy, and she's
yes,
claiming, "Oh, everything's great, everything's fine." And it's kind of hard to tell. Is everything fine?
Right.
Or is,
Well,
or is this
until-
the demon?
Yeah.
Because it does get
Yeah.
off that vibe. And that's when Hori from the shoreline starts screaming,
You
get
gotta
out,
get
get
out of
out.
there,
This
yeah,
is wrong. And he takes off, right?
Yep. And so eventually, they come back to the shoreline. Kobayashi chases Hori into the woods, and the cameraman takes off with Marika in a car. Marika very quickly passes out, and
Wakes up again.
she wakes up, but with the croaking,
That's typical. And like, if you've seen The Grudge,
right.
that's that same kind of,
yeah, like a J-horror. Is that a
right.
J-horror convention?
I've only ever really seen it in things like The Ring and The Grudge.
Right.
So.
And to be clear, this guttural moaning is what is exhibited by people that are, I guess, possessed
or
influenced in some
Right.
way. It's hard to see. It's hard to say who's possessed and who's not in this movie.
because there's that scene where Marika and her neighbor are having dinner together.
Yes, right. Marika, the actress. No, it's Marika, the actress, and I believe is it her neighbor or is it Kobayashi's wife?
Oh, you might be right.
We're going to have to fact check that. But this is before this happens. The actress is having dinner in a scene with, it's either her, I think it's Kobayashi's wife at this point because the other girl is dead. And there's a point where Marika stands up and starts moaning like this, and then a bunch of pigeons run into the window. And, it's very unclear if she's actually possessed or if she's just influenced somehow.
Right, but that's one of the scarier parts of
that was a
the
good
film,
part.
too.
We skipped over it. Regardless, she's in the car, and she ends up actually running out of the car, and the cameraman chases her. The cameraman has a name, actually. We can look that up, too. It might be on the wiki page. I'm not sure. But in the probably the second most climactic scene in the movie, Hori and Kobayashi run into the woods. Hori's just really not happy. He's pretty
He's
beside
claiming
himself.
he saw Kana.
Yeah, he claims he sees Kana, and of course, this is really brutal. They find a bunch of dead dogs.
The dead dogs.
Lots of dead dogs. They find a giant circle of white cloth, which white cloth is what was used to perform the ritual.
Right.
And there's a circle, and Hori's like, "Don't go in there." And I'm like, "Okay, that's pretty ominous." And they find, this was kind of weird. They find a cage structure with somebody in it that I'm assuming is Kana. But by this point, I think Kana is dead. And this is where it starts to get a little bit weird for me. And then, of course...
I think it is Kana. She's like elevated. She's sitting on a pile.
This is after that.
Right.
But yeah, we see Kana sitting on a pile of dead fetuses, which we skipped over that as well. But Junko Ishii
was a nurse.
She was a nurse. We found out that Kobayashi finds out that she was taking aborted fetuses.
And the reason she did that, which you also don't find out until just now, is that part of the ritual was they would sacrifice baby chimpanzees.
The original ritual,
right?
In Shimokage, and one of the cooler parts of the film is that Junko Ishii has kidnapped Kana and is using her as a medium to do the ritual,
right.
But she's using fetuses.
She's using actual babies,
right? Which is really
she
gruesome.
was stealing them from
where she works.
Hospital.
The hospital.
And they were aborted babies and
dead
babies.
Very gruesome turn, which I enjoyed. As sick as that is, but I did like that darkness.
And then it kind of cuts out there.
Yeah.
And it does a little, like a recap of how everyone ended up.
Right.
And it says that Hori is end up put into an institution.
Right.
Marika is fine, right?
Yeah, Marika is fine, which, it's hard to say. But at this point, before we talk about that, after this scene in the woods, which is very climactic, the last two things that happen are as follows. One is that Kobayashi finally finds Junko Ishii. She is dead. She has hung herself.
Yep.
The boy is alive, and I believe Kana is dead in the house.
And in that house, too, did you notice there is almost like a scarecrow of Kogutaba.
Ooh, I noticed the masks on the walls, but I didn't notice that.
It was like hanging from the ceiling.
That totally supports the idea that she was trying to give him human form.
Right, that's
Obviously,
what I think. That's what I took from it.
Yes.
Either in the form of Kana or the boy that she was with.
Which we'll talk about in a minute. But so at this point, and I was utterly bewildered, Kobayashi, in the biggest plot hole in the movie, takes this boy and adopts him.
Right, yeah.
Who does that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know the motivation behind that.
I'll tell you the motivation, in my opinion, and it's plot-based narrative rather than character-based narrative.
Something subtle that they could have put in is make it so that his wife and him couldn't have a child. Like they were,
that would have been cool.
And then that way he's got a reason for wanting to bring.
Yeah.
I mean, other than just generosity.
Yep.
But that doesn't really make sense.
You know, it was definitely a stretch. So he has this boy now. All seems well. It's all over. Marika is then, she goes to a mental hospital, I believe. You know, and I was unsatisfied with that because I didn't really understand. Maybe because Junko Ishii is dead, her possession is cleansed.
Right.
Who knows? And then, of course, the last scene we'll talk about, because there's definitely, I want to talk about the ectoplasmic worms before we're done.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, no, but we'll finish the plot.
Okay.
We'll finish the run through and our opinions on the end. Is that the Hori shows up at this house, at Kobayashi's house, and he's trying to basically kill this little boy.
He's got a rock. He's got just a rock in his hand. And he's saying, he's not just trying to kill the boy, he's trying to kill Kagutaba.
He's saying Kagutaba is in the boy. And, you know, to make a long story short, Kobayashi's not kosher with that, but Hori ends up bashing this kid's head in with this rock, basically. And then we see Hori is not on the boy anymore, and his face has become Kagutaba's face,
but in a bloody
way.
Mess,
and that was cool. A lot of people on the forums I read just called his face bloody, but it's actually Kagutaba's face.
Right.
So the boy is Kagutaba, and then we see Kana's ghost. I didn't realize it was Kana's ghost, but it is her ghost in the corner, behind him, which I didn't really understand. Maybe Kagutaba had absorbed her essence since she was the medium.
Right.
It's really hard to say. But her ghost is behind the boy for a fraction of a second, and then it's gone.
Right.
And then, of course...
They walk away.
Hori. This is one of the most perplexing parts of the movie. Hori takes the boy.
Right.
Hori takes the boy. Later, of course, Hori is found dead, and I want to say that it looks like there is a worm coming out of his mouth.
I didn't notice that.
It's a weird thing.
Okay.
I can't tell. You'll have to look it up again. Anyway, but Kobayashi's wife sets herself on fire, and then Kobayashi ends up missing. This, of course, is all seen in a tape after Kobayashi's movie ends. Kobayashi sends a package with the tape in it to this video office with no return address. We don't know where he is. It's a little bit strange, but it is an interesting way to end the film. And then, of course, we just know that we don't know where Kobayashi is. Marika is fine, maybe. Junko Ishii is dead, and Kagutaba is living on through this boy.
And the reason that his house burns down is it's probably say it. I can't say
Kagutaba?
it. Oh. Yeah, thank you. It's probably the demon influencing his wife because she sets herself on fire.
Oh, and she starts making that noise, doesn't she?
She makes the noise. She sets herself on fire, and the house burns down.
Right, because this demon is a destruction demon. It causes ill things to happen. So, you know, looking at the movie as a whole, it's Junko Ishii with this boy who may or may not yet be Kagutaba going around, and the power of Kagutaba is affecting people. And in the midst of all this, Kobayashi is trying to solve these deaths.
Yep.
But yeah, the end with it, like I said, it doesn't really. I think the ectoplasmic worms are my biggest issue because I don't understand it all.
I wonder if the worms might be because in the scene where she's sitting on the pile of dead babies, they're moving.
Yeah,
and they're kind of slithering almost.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's just Hori seeing dead babies.
Maybe, but remember that the worms eat people. People don't eat the worms. And also another worm-like thing is that these strings of the loops that people are
the nooses,
they look like worms. They're long. It's a series of chained loops, and then they're draped over all these houses and rooms, and those look like worms to me. But you know, something I was thinking about, it might even say it in the wiki summary, is that, so the first time Kobayashi goes to Hori, maybe the second time, and Kagutaba is brought up, Hori doesn't, the way that Hori brings this up is he's looking at Kobayashi and he says, "Who is Kagutaba?" As if Hori has never heard of it, as if it is not related to the worms.
That's true.
But I wonder if Kagutaba is somehow related to these worms, but if it's just one such worm, or like
maybe he's the worm. Well,
it's hard to say. Well, because
extension.
and when Kana is kidnapped, he tells Kobayashi the worms ate her, and then
Right.
he says to Kobayashi, "The worms ate you." Did you notice that?
So maybe the worms are just kind of a manifestation of Kagutaba.
Or something, yeah. But what leads me to not think that is that Hori doesn't know who Kagutaba is, but he knows what the worms are.
Right.
It also could be a weird translation issue where maybe worms, ectoplasmic worms, aren't the original interpretation. It's so hard to say, and so I really liked that idea, but I was never satisfied.
Fair enough. I mean, it doesn't really have a huge bearing on the plot, just because it is this crazy guy, and maybe he's just crazy.
That is true. Also, it could lend the fact that he's crazy, the fact that there may or may not be worms. We don't really know if Hori is good or bad because he runs off with Kagutaba, but we don't really know why. And that's not answered either. And I think I'm okay with that. But again,
it could be, though, because Kagutaba does influence those around it. Maybe he's taking Hori as kind of a guide. Because he can't just be a new Junko Ishii. Because he can't just be a little boy walking around. He has to have some.
And because Hori is a psychic, he's very susceptible to that.
Right.
Anyway, it was very interesting to me, but I felt like on top of the film being very long and convoluted, and introducing all these levels or layers that it didn't necessarily set out to even answer, just complicate maybe more at the end.
Yeah.
I did enjoy the film, but I think it did undermine itself a little bit, kind of significantly.
I think that's a fair assessment of it. I mean, it's definitely got more depth to it and more thought to it than any other found footage movie. Yeah, which I appreciate.
I think it's similar to, well, it's definitely more complex than a movie like Blair Witch, but it definitely feels classic because it's so different.
Right.
And it's very patient, and it's not
subtle,
stupid. Like the characters aren't, maybe they're stupid in some parts, but it never feels ridiculous. And it's a Japanese, we're coming from an American perception.
Right.
So, some parts might feel a little bit ridiculous in that regard, but I don't think the plot, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I don't think the story feels that ridiculous.
Well, a lot of people's big complaints with the found footage genre is put down the camera and run.
Yeah.
But just the nature of Kobayashi being a paranormal researcher, kind of puts that aside, and you understand why he's going deeper instead of backing off. And something
good that's a good point, because thinking about the movie as a whole, the movie doesn't put itself in a position where you're thinking that. I don't think there's a scene where I'm thinking, why would you not get out of there? Because in the climax, Marika really does want to cleanse herself, and Kobayashi's like, I got to do it. And nothing crazy, I don't think, happens to the extent that he should straight up, that we would think, why is he still here?
Right.
So that's a very good point. And there's nothing too unbelievable. Like I said, the part where he adopts the boy, that was the only part where I was like, this is a little ridiculous.
I'll give you that.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on the movie? As a whole, I would absolutely recommend this movie. I think you just have to go into it very open and very patient, and try not to get hung up on the foreignness.
Right. I would say if you're a fan of found footage, like I said before, check it out. If you're not a fan of foreign films or having to read subtitles, which I know some people don't, I would say probably skip it then, because it is very Japanese.
Especially, and this movie would be complex if it was simply
in English.
With native
English
to you, assuming you're English. Of course, we can't assume you're English, but in a native language, it's complex. But as an American viewer watching a Japanese movie, it already has different storytelling methods, and on top of that, 25 or so characters, twisting and turning plot, that doesn't really come to a full stop, yeah, it's intimidating in that sense, and it might turn people off, and I understand that.
Okay.
It didn't turn me off. I just was definitely
I would
left.
agree. I would agree.
You know. But if you go into it with an open mind and you're really looking for something unique in both the J-horror as well as the found footage genre, I think you're going to find something decently special about the curse.
Yeah. So I guess just to wrap it up, I'm probably going to try to put the YouTube link up on wherever we end up putting this.
I think we'll do the YouTube to the movie. We're probably going to do... Yeah, we'll try to get the best quality for that. I'd like to try to post this picture, too, of this potential Kagutaba mask on the pot, but I'm not, if I can't get it. That's going to be good. If you listened in, thank you so much. We're going to be putting social media pages up soon, Twitter, Facebook. We'd love to hear comments if you've seen the film, what you think, or if you haven't seen the film, just what you think about just hearing the discussion about the film.
Right, about the podcast in general, if you have any ideas, suggestions.
Absolutely.
Movie recommendations.
Yes, yeah, I think we're going to do movie recommendations too. The next movie we're going to do, though, is going to be The Green Inferno, which comes out this Friday.
Right, Eli Roth,
based on the movie Cannibal Holocaust, which, if you haven't seen, is brutally controversial, all about cannibals. We'll talk about it, obviously, for the next podcast. Next week. And we'll try to make this a weekly thing. So,
all right.
If there's anything else, thanks so much for listening. I'm Sam.
I'm Neil.
And this is what we think is Blood Feud. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much, everybody.